Hello, geometry students. In this lesson, a brief review of completing the square. You have a picture here that demonstrates what completing the square means. I'll be honest, my focus is not going to be so much on explaining where it comes from, as just showing you how to do it. And the way to do it is to remember half the middle term squared. That may sound strange, but it's a way of remembering it. Half the middle term squared means what you're going to do is you're going to take the middle term. It's not a middle term, but it will be. I want you to think of this as a trinomial, and I'm trying to find a number that will complete the square. Well, the number that completes the square is going to be the number that will eventually be the middle. Divide by 2, square it. Make sure you put it in parentheses. That's 3 squared, which is 9. The number that completes the square is 9. So, the number that goes here is 9. This also says to factor it. I'm going to factor it the same way every time, but I'm going to usually skip this step. This trinomial can factor into x plus 3, it's actually y plus 3, and that 3 is actually half the middle term, but not squared. So my final answer on this one is y plus 3 quantity squared. 9 was the number that completed the square, and y plus 3. Same thing for this one. I'm asking for the number that completes the square. Well, that's half the middle term squared. The middle term is negative 10, so be careful with the negatives. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5, but when you square that number, it becomes 25. That's the number that completes the square. It will always be added. That's because whenever you square it, it becomes positive. But when you go to factor it, it stays negative. It will be x, in this case, minus half the middle term, which is 5. And just so that you see where it came from, I've actually got the calculation down here. That completes the square. If you were to actually FOIL this out, FOIL meaning multiply it out. I know you're not supposed to use the term FOIL because people think that it's a sin. But I like FOIL. First, outside, that's a minus 25. Excuse me, a plus 25. Inside, make more mistakes when you're actually checking. Minus 5x, again minus 5x, and then negative 5 times negative 5 is plus 25. This is x squared minus 10x plus 25. That 25 is what allowed me to turn this into a perfect square trinomial. So that's all there is to it. Half the middle term squared. This 26 will be the middle term. It's actually a negative 26. $169 is the number that completes the square. You add it. If this were an equation, I would have to add the 169 here, plus I would have to add it on the other side to make the equation balanced. And then this will simplify into x plus or minus, in this case, minus half the middle term quantity squared. Like I said, if this equaled 169, you could actually go on and solve that by taking the square root of both sides. But that's actually not what this is, so I'm going to get rid of that. Excuse me, half the middle term squared. It's going to be a fraction. Let's just go with a fraction, with a decimal. I think people are more comfortable with decimals. I believe that's 2.25. 2.25 is the number that completes the square. But when I go to factor this, it will be y plus half the middle term quantity squared. Now look at this one. I've actually already got a number here. The first thing I'm going to have to do is get rid of it. I can't just ignore it, but I'm going to move it so that I now have a location to put my half the middle term squared. That 8 is not part of it. This is actually creating a like an equation of a circle. So I get rid of the 8. I'm going to add a 9. Technically, if you're adding a 9 here, you'd have to subtract a 9 over here. That's a little confusing for right now, so I'm not going to really focus on that. But technically, just remember, you can't just go around changing things. So this part here is now a perfect square trinomial. That is x plus 3 squared. I still have the plus 8 out there. Same thing over here. I'm first going to move this 5 over and get rid of it. Then I'm going to say this is my middle term. Negative 2 divided by 2 squared. Positive 1. That's the number that completes the square. I still have that plus 5 out there. And now this becomes x minus half the middle term squared. The 1 is actually included with this. And then I have that plus 5 out there. I know that looks confusing. I don't like it to look cluttered like that, but that's the way it goes. Move the 7. Move the 5. Half the middle term squared is 42. No idea what 21 squared is. 400 something. 441. That is the number that completes the square. It's added. Now this perfect square trinomial will factor the same way every time. X plus half the middle term squared. I still have this negative 7 out here, so I'm including that in the expression. Last one, take the middle term, negative 20 squared is positive 400. That's the number that completes the square. The instructions say complete the square. 200 completes the square. That means that this is now a perfect square trinomial that will factor the same way every time. I still have this plus 5 out here to deal with. And in case you don't believe it, expand this back out and see if it's true. It is x squared minus 40x. I added the 400. I only added 200. Oh, I just wrote that wrong. I was getting a little panicky there. I thought I'd made a mistake. I just wrote that wrong. Of course, the number that completes the square is 400. If I hadn't checked that, I wouldn't have called it. And I have that plus 5 out there. And that's that, completing the square.